this card right here. This card is a 9060xt 16GB, and it might be my favorite card I've ever bought, and I'm not joking. Right now I am using a 5080, as some of you may know if you came from my earlier video where I kind of ranted and raved about how disappointed I am in the RTX 5080 and what it's had to provide. But really, I want to reorient to a card that I think might be my favorite card I've ever gotten, by far. So, real quick, let's go through a little history of the cards I've had in the past. Let me write you up a little sheet and then we'll continue. I feel bad for editing me. So, this is about what we have right here. So, my first ever card was a 1060 3GB. This was my first time ever having a desktop tower and actually having a dedicated GPU in it. And that was pretty awesome. It was pretty awesome. It was one of the greatest experiences ever in my life when for the first time ever I was able to open up Skyrim Special Edition. And I did this in my grandmother's basement, connected to her TV in her basement living room. And that was one of the greatest experiences I've ever had, honestly, is booting that up and playing that special edition. It looked so beautiful to me at the time. And, it still holds up pretty well today, but it was beautiful. And then the next card I got some years later was the 1660 Ti 6GB. And it was a mobile chip. I had it in a laptop that I got, I think, in 2019. Great card. I loved that thing so much. But eventually, after I entered college, I decided that I wanted to upgrade. And so I spent too much money on a 3080 mobile, another laptop, because I thought at the time that, you're in college, you want something mobile, you want to be able to do work on this thing. And I didn't really think that through. Experience I've had with laptops, batteries are really bad. And anyway, the 3080 mobile was also, and this is still true today with laptops, is you have the same price for a system with the relatively named graphics card. However, it is so much weaker that you might as well treat it like a whole nother thing. And so you're spending a lot more money on this thing when it's way weaker. Anyway, so I spent a lot of money on that, and I did not like it. I eventually am like, you know what? Screw it. I hate laptops. I'm never going back. So I got, as you might have known from the last video, I did the 4070 Ti 12GB. Of course, it was the only 4070 Ti before the Super came along. And that card, pretty good. It performed very well, and it did exactly what I needed to do. It just didn't have a lot of VRAM, and, overall, I liked it. I loved it. I loved having that power. At 1440p, it was a beast, but at the same time, I really wanted something with more VRAM and a little bit more powerful. And, my brother needed a card for a build he was doing, so I decided to sell that to him, and I bought the RTX 5080, which has 16 gigs of RAM. And this card, the 5080, has been very disappointing. If you want to learn more about that, link to that earlier video is in the description. But this card, you might be asking, where the heck does this fit in to my list of GPUs? Well, I've gotten a 5700 XT as a GPU for an old system. I also used it as the interim GPU before I got the 5080 and between the 4070 Ti. Anyway, it broke. I was going to make a system for an editing PC as a secondary PC that I could also use on TV, and one that my sister could use. It's actually right next to me in this room. It's a PC that she's able to use, and I needed a GPU for it, and this had a decent price, and it had, everything I wanted, and there was a nice combo deal on a motherboard, CPU, and RAM, and I already had a extra case. Well, I actually still have to pay my brother back for that case. Anyway, we're going to ignore that. I had a power supply on hand, a good one. It actually came with my 5080. And I was able to throw together a pretty decent system for right around $900. Very solid. Could have been a bit better. A lot of the parts I had on hand, though, so I only ended up spending like 800 something. Pretty good. Anyway, and this GPU, let me tell you, I don't think there's been a more satisfying PC part purchase that I've ever made than this thing. It is a $350 card. I think I actually got mine for $370. It's a nice budget GPU. So you're talking lower end. I mean, I have a 5080, so I'm coming from high expectations, right? 5080 is still leaps and bounds better than this card, technically, in performance. If you were to ask me to choose one PC between one with a 9060 XT and one with a 5080, I would choose the 5080 any day. However, what is the more satisfying purchase? The 9060 XT by far. For what I spent, which was like $370 versus the $1,300 I spent for the 5080, this thing provides so much value with 16 gigs of VRAM. Of course, it's not as fast, but the capacity is awesome. Its power is more than enough for 1080p. Blazes through 1440p. I'd actually suggest 1440p for the resolution for this thing. And we're in an age of upscalers, so if you're worried, it won't get the high enough frames, upscale. It literally is not that hard. And honestly, 1440p upscaled from 1080p. Or 960p or whatever it ends up being in the actual like quality mode at 1440p, ends up, to my eye, looking better than 1080p ever could. To me, 1080p is dead. To me, of course, it probably has its place, but if it was up to me, 1440p would be like my base. If you're going to get something, get 1440p and 4K if you're a real high enthusiast. That's my opinion. Of course, there's esports, so do whatever you want, of course. However, this thing blows through 1440p, and it can do plenty of things in 4K. I run this on a TV a lot, and it plays everything at 4K with upscaling. There's some older games, Borderlands 3, you can run, very well at 4K native. Anything older, you can blaze through it 4K native, honestly. And it has more than enough VRAM for the level of power it has. It's at the point where it feels like there's too much VRAM. It's like there's so much freedom. I've never had this much freedom. Coming from my first card being a 1063 gig, which is the cut down version of the 1060, to then a 1660 Ti 6 gig, and then a 3080 8 gig, and then a 4070 12 gig. I've had these incremental jumps where every time I haven't gotten, in my opinion, enough VRAM for the power the thing puts out. Let's put it this way. I have, with the 4070 Ti, one of the things where it would use more than 12 gigs and die. Where this thing, which is 16 gigs, will play at a lower frame rate than the 4070 Ti would if it had more VRAM, but a higher frame rate than the 4070 Ti does. So this thing, for that application, is a better card, simply because of its VRAM capacity. And I love that. Ever since I've gotten all these cut down VRAM cards, I've really begun to appreciate the value that VRAM brings to the discussion of these things. Anyway, it has FSR 4. FSR 4 looks beautiful. To my eye, it's only a tiny bit worse than DLSS 4. And honestly, very usable. It's usable at 1080p even, honestly. But 1440p, stellar. 4K, wonderful. Love it. I love FSR 4. I might try to do a little bit more of a deep dive into FSR 4 on this channel. If you're interested, just let me know. I know a lot of people do that. A lot of people do this technical deep dive stuff. So I'm not sure if there's much I could add to the discussion. If there's anything you'd like to see from me, I will do it, and let me know. It also, this is like a base version. This is the Asus Challenger, right? Right? ASRock. I'm an idiot. I don't know. ASRock. Whatever. It's their cheapo brand. And it runs cool and it runs quiet. It's got 2 fans. It runs below 200 watts. I think it's like an 180 watt card. And it's pretty good. It runs in the 60s, like low 60s and mid and high 50s all the time. And I'm like, wow, that's nice. I'm used to things being hot and loud. I mean, the 5080 is all right. It's all right. But it, by virtue of its power draw, it's a lot hotter. It's a lot hotter, even with its huge heatsink. This thing's also smaller and more compact. It's cuter, you might say. I love huge cards, but sometimes these little things, they surprise you. Now, here is one of the few cons with the 9060 XT, but really the 9000 series from AMD in general. FSR 4, while it is beautiful and wonderful, it's just not in many things. It's not getting enough, implementation, which in the end leads to like, yeah, it's wonderful, but where will I use it? Like, is it actually that good if I can hardly use it and I have to default back to the FSR 3 model anyway, or not even use upscaling and stick with like TSR or something ugly? However, with OptiScaler and things like that, it's pretty much everywhere. I got this working in games before it was in them myself using OptiScaler, and that was super cool. That's super cool. Of course, it means you got to be a little bit more of a tinkerer. But honestly, if you're buying an AMD card, at this point, you're not a normie. All those normies with their NVIDIA cards. But yeah, cool card. Well, thank you for tuning in, and have a good one. Bye-bye.